So I will begin. If I may, my name is Maxim, and the cloud technologies are not an innovation. We have competition. So what challenges is it supposed to address, this technology, especially if we're talking about large-scale events such as conferences? First of all, there is the cost of rent and the equipment. In Europe, it is very expensive. In Ukraine, it is much cheaper. But then, not every hall allows you to install the booth, and then there's additional cost of assembling the booth, and then you need to invest more effort. You need someone to distribute the headphones, then to collect them after the event, because not every participant remembers to hand it in. They take it with them, not because they meant to steal it, but because they forget to return it. But for the organizer, the fine is around $20 to $25 per each headset or pair of headphones. Also, you can often hear that our participants speak English. We don't need interpreting. At the same time, if you decide to go without, then you cannot invite interesting speakers from other countries, non-English speaking, and you cannot have non-English speaking. You cannot have presentations in English, and that could be an obstacle. Then you would, if you decide to go with interpreting, then you need to have the booth, you need to have the equipment. But then the English language is not the most popular one in the world, or one of the most popular ones in the world when it concerns economy and other transactions. Also, if we're talking about online webinars, they are almost never multilingual, because somehow the organizers assume that the audience speaks English. And then you have speakers for whom English is not their native language, which impairs the overall result. And the speaker cannot speak their native language because nobody would understand them, their partners or their clients. And then the organizers, they lose money because if we're talking about engaging different speakers, and then also simultaneous interpreters, they also lose money on this because they sometimes have to compensate, to pay for the expenses themselves, or the organizers have to cover them. Either way, there's challenges involved, but there are ways to address them. There are tools to address them, such as SpeakUs, and there are, of course, other solutions, but since I'm the exclusive representative of SpeakUs in Ukraine, I will tell you about this specific solution. You don't need any equipment. Your interpreter can work from wherever, as long as they have the device. You can conduct business negotiations in this manner, allowing CEOs, for example, to connect with their partners. You could do it consecutively. You could opt for consecutive interpretation, but then simultaneous helps you save time. We have worked with several partners in Ukraine. For example, Google had a conference. Another example is that when Google had a conference in the United States, they chose SpeakUs to as their vendor of the remote interpreting service. So how this works, you need to download the application to your mobile device or to your tablet, then you work in real time with a 0.2-second delay, which is unnoticeable. Basically, you can listen to this interpretation without the headset through your speakers, for example, if you are listening to it from your home, so that you would not be disturbing anyone with the sound. This is essentially how your online booth, this is what it looks like. This resembles the standard booth in a way. Press on air and you go live. If you need to sneeze or pause for a second, you go mute. This is where you choose your language pair. Also, if you have two interpreters, the video, you will have the picture of the screen of your partner here in the corner, and they have the chat room to connect and switch seamlessly and discuss other issues. This is what you see on screen. You can see what is happening on the stage. As organizers, we either stream it on our own and we point the camera to where the interpreter needs us. If, for example, the air goes silent, the interpreter will see that, for example, the speaker has stumbled or maybe fell down or something is wrong with the presentation, or on the contrary, they will see that the speaker keeps going but they cannot hear them or do not hear them anymore. Then that means that something has gone wrong. As regards the conditions, if you listen to this interpretation, you need about, we recommend that you have 128 kilobit per second per person, and then you switch, you choose the channel. If 4G is available, then there will be no issues with your internet connection. You won't even need Wi-Fi. If you are interpreting, then we would suggest that you have a PC or a laptop, and you would have that you have broadband connection with at least 10 Mbps connection. So you need to work like clockwork, and this is what we strive to do. This is our competition. They offer similar package of services. There's also an American vendor, an American company that Evgeny mentioned, but they operate almost exclusively in the United States. Price-wise, SpeakUs is much cheaper, and like I said, in the territory of Ukraine, you get the support. You can have our expert visit you on site. And at this point, it is just us, myself and a colleague of mine. We support both the organizers and the interpreters. So this was my presentation, and since we're having a roundtable discussion, I think this is actually a much more interesting format than just me sharing my thoughts. So like I said, that interactive voting that we will be having, it's available at this link. If you follow this link, it will get you to the poll itself. I think we will start polling in a few minutes, and we will see. You will be able to monitor the results on the screen. Okay, so maybe we should just start with the presentation, with the first slide, and then discuss it as we go. Okay, so if I may, I will go back. So number one, as to the high cost of rent and the equipment and the penalties for lost items, the price that we offer is basically 10 times lower than you can find in Europe or even in Russia. So I don't think it is reasonable to mention this as an argument, because you will have to pay the interpreter, right? So the rent cost is not that high, actually. If you compare it with the interpreter's fee, it's almost unnoticeable. Like, I don't know, 150 euro rent for the headset. Of course, there are penalties if you lose the equipment, but this is why some organizers, they actually take your passport number. Well, actually, they don't do it, because if you have 100 guests at your conference, 100 visitors, you will not be able to take all their passport numbers. Anyway, but like I said, there are screwdrivers, for example, and there are other pieces of equipment, such as chisel, and those are two different things. As to different nuances and details and different suppliers, well, this is marketplace. There's a lot of interpreters too. There are many. Well, as the organizer, I communicate with everyone. I talk to people who assemble the booth, who do the sound, and then there's another supplier. Well, it's okay. This is how market works. You will still need to engage with people. You will have those in charge of the transportation or whatnot. So, like I said, I don't really see this as a convincing argument. As to some venues that do not allow you to place or to mount a booth, I would say that I haven't seen, in all the years that I've been in this market, I haven't seen a venue like that. I've been on the plane, on planes, on ships, on boats, I don't know, buses, dumpsters, what have you. There's hardly a venue that I haven't mounted a booth at. But if the owner of the venue says that they will cooperate with you if you are certified, and they work exclusively with certified providers, well, maybe. In Ukraine, we have some, maybe, I don't know, house of academia, or, well, we have owners like that. They say that we will not cooperate with the supplier, or this is the supplier with whom we cooperate, and period. Well, we have something like this in Ukraine as well, especially if this person is not willing to, if she knows me and she won't let me, this owner or the manager of the place, if she knows me and she won't let me in, then she will not let you in either. And she may do that, and she doesn't care. This lady, for example, this Tamara Ivanovna, whoever, you don't know her. This lady, she's tough. She manages the building, and she knows things. So as far as the constraints that have to do with the format of the event and the parameters of the venue, what did you mean by that? I meant, for example, negotiations, when you have your CEO here and you have their partner in Italy. I know we do this plenty in Hong Kong, in Italy, wherever. What if the negotiations start in 10 minutes, for example? Negotiations like this never start in 10 minutes. They have secretaries to arrange this. I've been doing this for 25 years. But I've heard of instances like this. No, really, that's really, that was stretching it. Well, sometimes it happens indeed when you need the interpreter.
Only now we see new these emerge. I mainly agree with what Dmitry has said. There is the need is there, and the possibility is there to set up a SIM interpreting using these hardware and software solutions similar to SpeakUs and the competitors. Speaking of competitors, early this year, I tried to pilot. I tried to test all these companies. I tried to get in touch with all of them, and it was massive that I got in touch with the Fosters, even though they are an American company. But this Interprify never actually replied to my email. Interactive were going to reply to me for 2 weeks. They are the company that promise sim interpreting these days. We tried to appoint a meeting online, and they kind of flopped one meeting, saying we have kind of forgotten that. Can you imagine how the organizing, how their management works? Maybe their technical side is perfect, but not this one. In fact, I wanted to speak about this separately, but once we have started, I'll echo. I wanted to check, I wanted to test what remote interpreting is, and Interprify never replied to my letter, even though I wrote to them several years ago, actually, like 18 months ago. The speaker is not using a microphone. Yeah, it's possible. I can say that they have replied to me. I wrote to them by dubbing the terms of reference that I myself received, and they quoted kind of $2,400, and my price was 280. So the difference is huge with the Ukrainian prices. I wrote to them when they were offering consecutive rather than SIM, and their quality was not very good. And I also communicated with a very mysterious startup called WO, but they only do phone translations, phone interpreting. And yeah, this sounds interesting, and the difference is huge: 140 and 2,400. 280. Your prices are higher than ours. Yeah, this is with interpreting for 2 hours. 2 hours means half a day. Okay. It also depends on which time, and maybe it's 2 hours that keep the interpreter idle. Maybe they will agree to get the money for these 2 hours. It's difficult to invite speakers from different countries. I have a lot of events where we have directorates where the speakers use platforms far better than Skype, such as Cisco. And I understand that this can be a solution too. We can check this on the positive side. My plus is in the left column, and Alexei's plus, Alexei's check is in the right column. I can place half a plus in this for this to support this. Most events that I face, that I do, are those where they have 1 or 2 remote speakers, and the rest are right here, including speakers and attendants, and they want to be there, they want to participate, and they using conventional systems and conventional interpreters. They're here as well, and most customers feel more comfortable this way. It's not what I mean. We have experts from China, and their experience is interesting. And when we want to hear what they say on a project, maybe for a 40-minute session, and the organizers are ready to pay the airfare and accommodation, but we want to they need to immediately invite an additional pair of interpreters, but they have to do that as it is. But when they have an English language conference, and they maybe don't want sim interpreting because they expect the audience to know English, and they do not have an opportunity to invite in a speaker who cannot speak in English. And my answer can sound rude, but this means that they maybe didn't want that at all. That's how I put it, and most people put it. We have bilingual interpreters, leaving alone Chinese speakers. There was a joke where there's a Ukrainian conference, and suddenly an organizer rushes to me and says, "We will have a speaker speaking Spanish," and we say, "Okay." We don't have, you didn't order Spanish interpreting, and they say, "How come your interpreters do not speak Spanish? They are interpreters, they are professionals." If we know the language in advance, we can invite a bilingual interpreter, or to invite an interpreter to, and pay them less for interpreting this particular speech, this particular presentation. But I'm speaking about cases where there's no simultaneous interpreting at all in a conference. I can share my experience. It's a couple of years, actually, maybe 6 years ago. I'm not sure that remote interpreting existed then, but this is where it would have come in handy. We invited a group of speakers from Kazakhstan, which they're oncologists, doctors, and there's a European Society of Medical Oncology conference, and there are 800 attendees, and the whole of the conference is in English, and it was expected that everybody would know English, but the guys from Kazakhstan didn't know English at all, and they had to address this on the spot. And they invited two interpreters who accompany a tour guide, and then the organizers just did as follows. They invited a couple of us to switch to simultaneous interpreting, which was actually Shoshatarj, and we were just standing behind other people's backs. And this is where remote interpreting could be useful. Okay, applause goes to into the right column. But in principle, I also know a story where an interpreter is sitting somewhere behind the speaker's back, and the speaker keeps turning around and keeps saying, "Why are you speaking behind my back? You're interfering, you're intervening with what I'm trying to listen to." And that was, it's very relevant what Anna said. Delegates from other countries also want to travel. We know that one of the goals of coming to a conference is not just speaking and listening, but also to networking. A lot of things are being discussed on the fringes, on the if you are not traveling, if you are not and if you're just using remote interpreting for speaking, you lose things. You will still have to go. But okay, we have a big plus in the right column, and we go on. The organizers have to speak a language they don't speak in order to, they're not natives to, in order to appease the public, the audience. And I think if the information is needed, if the customer needs this, they will pay for a good interpreting. But how can we do an online webinar with sim interpreting? What I always say is all important events do not happen just from the blue. There's let's see. There's a weekly webinar that CEO of a company does, and they have an audience of tens of thousands of people who join, who connect to Zoom or Skype or another software, where CEO shares the news each week. How do we do sim interpreting? And the CEO does not speak English. I've never seen a CEO who doesn't speak English. Maybe he speaks German or Spanish. I've worked with German companies. All of them speak English. If we build on everybody speaking English, then this is cool. But I'm sure that not all CEOs know English. We know we have interpreted for a Nobel Prize winner. He seemed to be from the United States. And when we said to him that we translated his book, he was surprised and said, "You shouldn't have spent your time on translating what should be read in the original." And and the same happens with SEO. We should not confuse fragmentary cases with systemic cases. CEOs have to know English. If they don't, then the company is no good. Do you mean that the audience also needs to know English, just as the CEO does, in order to use the product? I think, and not even it's not even I who thinks this. If you want to go to a global market, you should use lingua franca, and it's English that is the lingua franca of the world today, rather than Chinese. We are speaking. Most people speak English. But there is Pakistan, there's South America, there are users of the products, and they should get information. In which language do they have to get this information? I will maybe try to support this CEO case, make a case for them. Which language? Why should we have sim interpreting if while the order was for consecutive? All of a sudden, we find out that the CEO of a large scale company, that his dad is here, and his dad wants to be in the board meeting, and he was the one who founded this factory, and he's a distinguished man, and I do shushita. So when this happened, I had to do shushitage for him, and all of a sudden they found out that some people didn't. Some people don't understand what others say. While they pretend to know English, and they try to persuade others that they do, but in fact not all of them know English as well as they should. Maybe they should be speaking the language they're more confident about. And what we're talking about is that, yes, the need can arise at any moment. Any need can arise at any moment, just like we can die suddenly. There's a market opportunity. Okay, the market opportunity is there. You were there, and you were invited to do shushitas. If they have an interpreter on the spot, they do not need to call anywhere and to organize anything. Especially the thing that you mentioned is a piping plant. When the audience, when the participants are talking about some very narrow subject, you cannot immediately find an interpreter who's competent about this subject. I was very actively, I took an active interest in this. There's a curious story about remote interpreting without the internet that we have now. Yes. Well, the story goes as follows. It was maybe 10 years ago. There was in Fedosia. And we, Tatiana and me, went to a conference. It was a conference in the big room, and there was a panel, a classical type panel with a table and a tablecloth, and there was a speaker stand and a jug of water, and all of a sudden the electricity goes off. The building is completely without current, without electricity, and we could not say to these very tough men that we cannot work. And me and Tatiana looked at each other and realized that we need to do something. And the speaker, by the way, continued speaking, and I said to her, "Let's speak louder." And we took turns just speaking before they turned the lights back on. I was listening with one ear, and we were speaking aloud for everyone to hear. That was my first experience of remote interpreting via a whole room of attendees. I'm really taken interest in this, but I'm about effective socialism. I don't like when somebody takes my work from me or somebody takes my bread from me. So when I was trying to contact mobile platforms, I knew what I needed for. I was not very happy about what our suppliers and providers of equipment and services offer. And the same is about the internet space. I had cases where the sim interpreting happens right on the go when there's a tour of a company and everybody's speaking and listening, and there's a radio guide that you use and this radio guide, radio receiver and transmitter. This is a system that they use if they use a multi-channel receiver and transmitter, then it's just wonderful. The main thing is to test your equipment well, to protect it from noise and from sound artifacts, and to make sure the transmission is good between the receivers. And from my experience, all German companies have this. They always have a case of these receivers and transmitters, and everything works all the time. I've been there, and it was the time of Zoom. While I was looking for a scheme that does not steal my bread, the bread from the providers of equipment and the internet from the organizers. There was a very urgent situation, and I was looking for a solution where you could use phones, where you could interpret using phones, but this does not replace normal hardware or normal systems. This is an emergency system, so to say. And I've also remember cases where there was sim interpreting via Skype. I get the original from one Skype account and I speak into the other Skype account, but the Skype is very unreliable. So it became very unreliable since Microsoft bought it. It seems that they cannot cope with the bandwidth, with the flow of customers. They even have artifacts and noise in their paid platform. So far, Zoom is the best. Zoom is the optimum platform. I can give the floor to Dima because he has worked with Zoom and he used it maybe the day before yesterday. What I can say is you have no problems with Zoom. The only thing is that when you have to use several applications, including SpeakUs and Zoom, they can conflict on one computer, and that's why I use a very dumb method. I listen from a mobile and I speak into the computer, and there's no conflict then. And I can confirm indeed there are a lot of events where all of a sudden the organizers realize that they need an interpretation, and somebody calls me and says grab a taxi and rush for it because they've already started. And it's good for me because I can reach the venue within half an hour. And maybe the platform will make the markets broader, because we have traditional conferences that took a lot of time to prepare, and there are for which there are good algorithms. But at the same time, this is a new reality, and we need new solutions.
I can tell you how it happens if you don't have any experience. This is last week's experience. It was a scheduled event. It was planned in advance. There is this organization that organizes different motivational speeches and gatherings of that sort around the world. And back in July, they were supposed to have a gathering like that and some holotropic breathwork or whatever in Croatia. and they were expecting a Russian delegation. They were doing it in English, and at some point they were thinking about inviting an interpreter and having the booth. And they booked the dates last year, so we decided to experiment. Long story short, and we tried to we tried we tested it, and then we did it. So I would spend the entire day at home at my PC. Usually they require cable connection, not Wi-Fi. So we use the interface that Maxim showed. That's what it looked like, but then you need to consider a number of factors. Regarding the screen, where you're supposed to see what happens at the venue, the camera was too far away. It was all blurry, and the speakers were looking like some white or red dots, and there was really not much to see, although the sound was fine, and the stream was uninterrupted maybe for half a second, but you just pushed the refresh button and it got all good again. And my partner was not with me in my apartment. Instead, she was interpreting from Moscow. It was great that we could see each other on screen. They asked us first if we wanted to use the camera because that would take some of that, occupy some of that internet connection. But we know that we need to see each other, like wave hands at them or make faces. So whichever channel you use to communicate with your partner. But long story short, it was a good experience and we had positive feedback. But I think I can also say that it's not really a tiring assignment at first sight, but then you do feel tired at the end of the day. I think simply because there is no clear boundary between your workplace and your home in this instance. But overall, the organizers loved it, and I think we will deploy it as a full-fledged solution. I think in the fall, we're supposed to interpret via the SpeakUs interface again. If you have any questions, I'm ready to address them. Regarding the pros of the solution, you can leave the room, go grab a coffee, then go back to your PC, and you would still hear what the speaker is saying. Unlike with the actual venue, you cannot move from room to room, although you often feel like you want to do it because the topic of the presentation turns out to be not what you expected. But when you're doing it from home and you just click the link, you join the conference, and then you can do something else at the same time. So that gives you, this technology, it gives you a number of advantages. I completely agree that it's not about competing right now, because if we look at the cost of this conference of UTIC, it would be cheaper because it's a long event. 3 sessions, you have 3 tracks, you have multiple sessions. So right now, our niche is those short-term conferences, some webinars that last for up to 2 hours, and you have a French speaker or a speaker of another language, and it just doesn't make sense to hire interpreters to install the booth and have the equipment. Also, there are certain events where people normally don't invite simultaneous interpreters, or they do it consecutively, or using the tour guide or radio guide systems. So I would compare it to the market to the taxi market. Right? We had regular cabs before, and now we have Uber that works worldwide. They compete within the system, and they are remunerated quite nicely. We're not trying, right now, we're not aiming to dictate the prices or influence the cost of interpreting in any way. Whatever the interpreter charges, I pay them because this is simply the information I relate to the client, and then the client pays. I don't make any money on the interpreters. I don't make business out of it. I just see it as an additional opportunity for the interpreter to make some money for themselves. Well, I think I could. There's a number of concerns here. Because if we imagine the bigger portion of interpreting is done online, this automatically opens this window of opportunities for some suburban linguist who thinks of themselves as interpreters. They do not network with their colleagues. They don't attend seminars like this one, or workshops, or whatever. They just want to make money, and they want to make it fast. So they could change the marketplace. There's a good chance that they can do it. At the same time, this is the opportunity for us to interpret an event that has taken place at a country to which normally we don't get invited, because you can save on the ticket costs and other expenses. Also, there are certain responsibilities that you have as the interpreter, especially if you are considering working remotely. I don't think this will change the structure of the market dramatically. I don't think anybody will push anybody out. But I think that the development of this particular area actually saves us all a good deal on the logistics. Say you get up in the morning, you're supposed to spend 2 hours stuck in traffic or on the train, deprived of oxygen, and you get to the venue exhausted. And you start thinking that it would have been much better to spend all this time on interpreting instead of on the travel. So this the remote solutions, they will actually save us all a lot of effort. We won't have to go to the office every day anymore. So back to the remote interpreting and what you need to do that. I was privileged to start my interpreting, as when I interpreted movies, and back then it wasn't even legal. No, scratch that. But when you interpret this, before you interpret something, you actually have to rewind it several times to actually somehow figure out what all those vowels put together mean. Of course, today, thank God, we don't have to do that anymore. But nevertheless, you have to be able to decipher poor signal, poor speech. It's not always that you get the sound from the mic. Sometimes someone just starts streaming what they want interpreted from the YouTube channel or other interfaces, or use other interfaces using the 3 or 4G internet. You can even conference via WhatsApp and get the sound from that negotiation that you need to interpret. So you, as the interpreter, you're supposed to have 2 smartphones. One to use for WhatsApp streaming, and the second one to actually interpret into. But this is like a crash solution. Of course, it's best to always know in advance about your events, but notwithstanding, you're supposed to be trained to decipher things like that. And just watching some TV show every once in a while is not enough. No, you go online, you find a YouTube stream, and you start interpreting it just to practice. You need to do it systematically because this is the only way to get the skills. So when you end up at an out of the blue assignment, it will not exhaust you. You won't have to spend all that effort and the brain power to waste it on the poor quality of the sound that you get. Your ear needs to be trained to do that. Thank you, Ilyosha. But yes, practice makes perfect. You keep practicing, and then Mykola Klimuk comes, and like he said yesterday, I forbid any streaming or any other sort of broadcasting of what I'm going to be saying. And at first, everybody was so surprised, except maybe for the interpreters. Yes, unfortunately, we don't have that speak slower button, even if it's very not remote. It could be helpful, but if we're talking about remote interpreting, there's even there's even fewer chances that the speaker will actually remember that they are being interpreted. But again, I cannot say that this is the downside of remote interpreting only, not necessarily. To add to that, when you're doing a webinar, for example, featuring several speakers from different countries, somebody is participating from their workplace, from some pretty building, and then, or they might be using some old laptop with this awful connection, and yet they nevertheless might be under the impression that everybody can hear them, and that in turn impairs interpretation. And when you, as an interpreter, have to actually figure out, to put all those pieces together to figure out what they're saying, this is the most exhaustive part. I've read this evidence that said that even when you do it remotely, when you translate remotely, you get even more tired. It's even more tiresome, say, because here we're talking about different frequency of sound transmission. When you do simultaneous, you're supposed to hear something else. And if it's the same frequency, my voice and what I'm hearing, but if it's the same frequency, my voice and what I'm hearing, it's more pressure on me. But I've been working with speakers for some time now, and I can say it's really an issue. Normally, I can hear everything pretty well. There's not really much difference. A question to you both. What about confidentiality? Because I must have missed it, Maxim, when you were delivering your presentation, or you never mentioned it. What about confidentiality? I wanted to ask the same thing, actually. No, nothing is being recorded either way, and you cannot join the conference unless you have the access code. And in the future, we're also planning to have people join to manage that process manually. I'm not talking right now about the SBU or some secret service or whatever. I am not going to approach them. I know that this is impossible at this point, and they are not my target audience. Anyway, I'm not, and I wasn't. I was never aiming at this market in the first place, but at that market segment. But sometimes the organizers ask me in writing that they want the event recorded. We can do that, but we need an express agreement, because by default we do not do that. We do not record. I could also add that the Secret Service is not your target audience, but you are theirs. Trust me. Or FSB. or FSB in could be interested in this as in a source of information. At least we in Ukraine have to keep that in mind, and so do many of our clients. But we always sign NDAs with them, and often we have to use infrared equipment, even when we could have used radio frequencies, but they are very cautious about the signal getting outside of those walls. Like what you mentioned about, moving from room to room. Burdikov from Minsk said you could hear it 3 floors up. And it actually made me smile because I don't remember tasks like that. But anyway, a question, if I may. If we're talking about smartphones, how do you do that? Do you use mobile phone providers? Do you use Wi-Fi? How they just need the internet connection. It could be Wi-Fi or a local internet operator. The reason I'm asking the question is that because in Ukraine, even in Kiev, our capital, we have certain buildings, for example, that were initially built for some public gatherings, but the Wi-Fi there is no good. It's quite frankly shitty. So, and no GSM connection, no decent GSM connection there either. So, and I've been working with some of them for 3 years, for example, and I haven't noticed any changes, even though they do gather people on daily basis. But to them, the solution actually might be interesting. The problem is, back to the pros and cons, a big pro of your system is that it is tailored to large events. And there is no provider in Ukraine who could provide the equipment, the headphones for 5,000 visitors, for example. Yes, that energy forum that you mentioned, yes, I covered that. I had to rely on my competition too, but we did it. Anyway, that's a big con, like I said. But on the other hand, there's our audience, there's clients. And I see that some of them still have those old versions of their mobile phones, including me. They don't use smartphones. Younger people, they use them often. Alexei and I, we once had this situation when we were interpreting at a conference held at the Karazin University. And as soon as we started interpreting, a few sentences into the interpretation, something happens to the switch. There was some smoke. Something was obviously burning, but we have the chancellor here, we have the Italian ambassador, we have people from the Ernest company, and everybody's confused what's happening. Nobody could figure out what was happening with the interpreting. But then we thought of that Zoom solution. But it turned out that some of those participants, especially the older participants, they were using the phones like you mentioned. Those were not smartphones. So I don't think it's really fair to say at this point that we are all computerized, that we all have smartphones. I don't think that's the case right now.
But life goes on, and actually, if Nokia 3310 breaks down, you buy your next smartphone. It might be cheap, but it will be a cheap smartphone that will cost less than the Nokia 3310. I'm not saying that our technology is good for everyone. We have venues without internet. We have retrogrades who are afraid of technology. We have people who do not use planes or trains. And the situations can be different. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. But I'm speaking about a new product in the market that in some cases will be the only tool possible. In other cases, it will be competitive, and in still other cases, they are just convenient. And I'm speaking about those. I'm not speaking about those who have a budget for conventional interpreting. They will keep ordering that. But those who do not have an opportunity, who do not have the money for simultaneous interpreting, but still they understand that they may have 20 clients in their event who do not know, attendees in their event who do not know English. Let's speak about Fedorov Hub in Kiev, where they invite up to 200 people, and they have very expensive tickets and fare, and they may invite us because they may have one foreign speaker and 20 people who do not speak English, and they order sim interpreting for 1 hour, and it's much cheaper that for them. The situations can be different. We had a case with a cancer clinic. They had a conference on the uterus or the vagina disease or something, and I found an interpreter who was a professional in vaginoplastic solutions and surgeries, because but then they decided not to take this up, because not to invite us to interpret, because their doctors are afraid of new technology, even though this particular interpreter still worked at this event and was very happy. Situations can be different, and they used conventional sim interpreting. No problems with that. Clients are can be of different kinds, and I realize that there are clients who will find this beneficial, and that's it. And I will be happy when simultaneous interpreters will get an opportunity to earn more money, and event organizers are also happy. One more thing, on a futuristic note, I think it was Vika who wrote on Facebook that translators have a wonderful opportunity because they have an editor who will prompt what to do. And in our case, it often happens that we go to interpret at an event, and we may have we may consult from an experienced colleague. But even if we record a piece of the event, we do not have unless we record a piece of an event, we do not have access. But if this becomes a routine practice, if this is part of a contract that records that you can record part of your interpreting, and then maybe a more experienced colleague in a company will review it and maybe prompt it, and it will be similar to online editing. And my real interpreting actually was not my first real experience in interpreting was not real. It was in a dummy booth in a competition, in the Cosinus competition, and this is where this has been implemented. Tools can be different. Summing up, maybe we have not we have not really rounded up this discussion. By the way, I'd like to note that when you say that it's beneficial, it's profitable for the customer, it's not always beneficial for the interpreter, because it's mainly at the expense of the interpreter's work that the price gets lower. I worked at my usual price, at my usual rate per day, and then where's the how is it profitable for how can they cut costs? We didn't have an opportunity to swim in the sea after the work. I think that's lost profit. And you didn't have an opportunity to speak with attendees and to learn new terminology. This you can do that by yourselves, but this is additional work. Yes, that's possible. Maybe. But coming back to what Maxim has mentioned, and I will repeat that we have two tools. There's there's a knife and there is a screwdriver. They're both flat and long, and we can cut using a knife, and we can use a screwdriver to tighten screws. Both solutions exist, and it's up to the client and the market to decide what's more convenient. But in fact, I think that conventional systems are not obsolete, because they will be around for a long time. We will even maybe have even remote interpreting using the receivers, meaning that the technical parts will stay the same. What they did at the Kazakh Economic Forum, they had an alternative. They could use SpeakUs or conventional SIM interpreting, and the statistics was 50-50. There were many spaces, and it was comfortable, it was convenient for people that they could move around from hall to hall using their smartphone. It can be an option. Radio systems also give this opportunity, actually, but it seems strange to sit in one room and to listen to speakers in another room. Not all of us are multitaskers, but we can probably round up here. Thank you.